as well. Now, Patrick, let's move on to Ukraine. Well, what's the latest?
Oh, just a little update on what's going on with the Ukrainian conflict. A lot is going on this week, and some of the more noteworthy developments. Let's take a look.
Well, okay, we'll take a look at this first. So here's Defense Intelligence, their latest propaganda piece, saying that, well, they're finally admitting that the Russians have likely made tactical gains around Bakhmut. And then they said in the south, Russian units have made advances, so they're acknowledging advances. However, Russian units have likely suffered particularly heavy casualties around Volodar. As inexperienced units have been committed, Russian troops likely fled and abandoned at least 30 mostly intact armored vehicles in a single incident after a failed assault. So they don't really know what's going on. That's the words like likely and so on. But look, here's the thing. Today, massive attacks, missile attacks in Ukraine. Air alert again announced in all oblasts of Ukraine, says Euromaidan Press. That was twice there were major air alerts today. But huge numbers of missiles going into Ukraine. But already the mainstream press and various governments getting very excited about it because, well, here's Reuters. Ukraine says 2 missiles crossed into Romania and Moldova. So their claim is that the missiles flew through Romanian and Moldovan airspace on the way to Ukraine from Russia.
Well, that's what the article says, but the headline implies something
else. Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, the implication here and what's being pushed by the Romanian authorities is that, well, hold on, we're a NATO country.
This is so irresponsible by Reuters, but it should be a good example for people watching as to the real subtle propaganda. Yes. Think about how tense things are right now. NATO Article 5 triggers and that sort of trap with Romania, for instance, Mike, and then they run a headline like this, even if it didn't happen, but it just seeds the sort of conversation and it increases the tension.
Yes.
And politicians read this. Listen, let's be honest, Mike. There's MPs and congressmen that'll read that headline like,
believe it.
Like Lindsey Graham, and that means Russian missiles landed in those countries. They're not that smart. They can't tell the difference. And so it moves into the rhetoric, and they just raise the tension.
So Moldova's defense ministry has confirmed that a Russian missile violated its airspace, or at least that's their claim, and they have apparently summoned the Russian ambassador. So where does that take us? That takes us to the Guardian coverage of the same.
Well, it's good news, Mike. Things have gotten serious and desperate, apparently, that they've deployed Luke Harding to Kiev to report on this. The most discredited journalist in the entire mainstream media is our man in Kiev. The Guardian have got their guy there hauled up in some kind of 5-star hotel, double suite somewhere in the heart of Kiev, right in the front line of the action, of course.
Good.
So there's Luke Harding. So totally discredited, made up a fabricated story about Paul Manafort visiting Julian Assange. The Guardian never retracted it, along with divulging the passwords to these files that they ended up indicting Assange about. So we just thought it's fitting, Mike, that we're going to update the profile picture here of Luke Harding, and just to know that they've got the best guy on the job there, Clown World exclusive, our man in Kiev. So there he is, folks. But here's the real, and obviously look at the staged photo that the Guardian running here, all the serious guys in the bunker, war map. It's almost laughable that these are actual authentic photographs of anything, but this is what they're pushing. Now Luke Harding's pushing in here that Ukraine's fierce resistance and Russians are taking losses and so forth. So he's a propagandist. That's what his job is. He's been caught spinning fake news, and yet the Guardian, shameless as they are, will just run him as their sort of main correspondent. They're anti-Russia guy. They're manning Kiev. Here's the real update here. This is from a Telegram channel, milchronicles. So pretty accurate battle map. We've cross-referenced with a number of other similar channels, and they're all saying the same thing. So this is Bakhmut here. This is where the heavy fighting is. Major offensive today. Major offensive by Russia. That's what all reports are basically showing.
Yeah.
So, and it looks like in many ways, at least in this theater, the Ukrainian forces are hugely outgunned. So it's not good news for Ukraine, but you're not going to read that in any of the Western mainstream media
Right.
reportage. So, but here's a really interesting story, Mike, that's broken. And this is interesting. And as we say, there's two political maxims. Timing is everything, and nothing happens by coincidence in politics. Zelensky takes credit for derailing the Minsk agreements. Why on earth would he be saying this now? This is an extended interview with Der Spiegel, which just was printed, I believe, yesterday, and has a number of bizarre admissions by Zelensky. What could possibly be going on here? Let's take a look at what was said. And this, Zelensky said that he viewed the agreements as a concession on Ukraine's part and never actually once sought to implement them. Instead, they were merely used to exchange prisoners with the two breakaway Donbass republics. And this is the detail of that. He said, but as for Minsk, the Minsk peace accords as a whole, I told Macron and Merkel, we cannot implement it like this, says Zelensky. I told Putin the same as the other two. They were surprised and said, if we had known beforehand that you would change the meaning of our meetings, then there would have been problems even before the summit. So here's the question, Mike. Why is this happening now? Is he covering for the statements by Angela Merkel? Just a couple. Is he doing a quid pro quo, a favor for his Western partners? Is that what's going on?
Could be.
So this is the question we have to ask ourselves. Timing is everything, and nothing happens by coincidence in politics. So Zelensky's been put up to say this for a reason. The question is why.
Yeah.
So keep your radars up, everybody, and look for clues as to what this means. So, but that leads us to the big ticket item, Mike, this week, the Nordstrom Pipelines. So we've got some movement on the Nord Stream story at long last, the Nord Stream pipelines here. And what is actually going on? Well, there's some interesting revelations from Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Seymour Hersh, which have come out. State-sponsored terrorism. The question is, who is responsible for the state-sponsored terrorism? Is it an Anglo-American job? That's the question. Will we get answers on this? Well, let's take a look at what Cy Hersh has to say here. And this is the Substack headline. This article has made absolute thunderous tremors throughout Washington and the media. The mainstream are very careful not to touch this too much because it's explosive. How America took out the Nord Stream pipelines. All we've had is denials ever since this happened in September. Total denial. So the New York Times called it a mystery, said Hersh, but the United States executed a covert sea operation that was kept secret until now. He's quoting anonymous sources here. Here's what he says. Basic gist of it. This is a well-written article, by the way. You expect no less from Seymour Hersh. Last June, Navy divers, important point there, Navy divers operating under cover of a widely publicized mid-summer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22. We discussed this
at the time
on this program as well. Planted the remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later were detonated and destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of operational planning here. Okay, that's Hersh, and he goes on. The divers were Navy only and not members, this is important, not members of American's Special Operations Command. Why? Whose covert operations must be reported to Congress and briefed in advance to the Senate and House leadership, to the so-called Gang of 8. So do you see what's happened here? They moved it away from special ops using regular Navy divers out of Panama City, okay, deployed them to do part of, during the Baltops, in the sort of low, the shallow part of the seabed there, where divers could access. So the Biden administration was doing everything possible to avoid leaks as the planning took place late in 2021 and into the first months of 2022. Do you see when they started planning this?
Did they know what was coming?
Of course they knew that was coming. That's the implication here. And that's, to me, one of the most explosive parts of this report. Now, so Joe Biden basically said, do you remember back in, I think it was last February of 2022, he said that we're going to sort out the Nord Stream pipelines. Yes. Let's roll that clip.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will I promise you we'll be able to do that.
So that was open admission. And what's important here, Mike, is that he did say that publicly and didn't use special ops, doesn't have to do congressional oversight with the House and Senate committees on that. So this is a new type of deniability. It's a deniability. In other words, it gives them safe, so they can't say they're covering anything up. This is one of the most cynical and mendacious moves by any U.S. administration, maybe in history. This is a new type of warfare. I mean, did anybody vote for this? This is threatening World War III.
Right.
No one's ever, I mean, the U.S. has never openly, no one's ever openly, not a NATO country, gone after infrastructure like this. That's a joint project of one of their closest allies, in Germany. Hugely dangerous. Was this a unilateral move by the United States, or did they have a partner in this?
Very good question, because we've got to remember that, of course, there was the allegation as a result of a leak, apparently a hack of an iCloud account, that a message had been sent to Antony Blinken from Liz Truss at the time saying, it's done.
Interesting, yeah. Well, and that was reported at the time.
It was, absolutely, yes.
So was there any pushback on that? I don't remember seeing much pushback from the media claiming it was fake.
Right.
So does it stand as data, as evidence?
I don't think there's been any absolute denial of it.
So that lends to the idea, Mike, this is an Anglo-American job.
Right.
The special relationship added again. Back to Seymour Hersh, let's take a look at what else is in here. What became clear to participants, according to the source with direct knowledge of the process, is that Jake Sullivan intended for the group to come up with a plan for the destruction of 2 Nordstrom pipelines, and that he was delivering on the desires of the president. So Jake Sullivan being the key actor here, he is a former Hillary Clinton staffer. He is one of the architects of the Russiagate hoax, and the Alpha Bank hoax and all of these things that they used to create a conspiracy theory that Trump was being backed by the Russians here. So let's take a look at this. So here are the key players in this plan, according to Hersh: Victoria Nuland, Antony Blinken, and of course at the end, Jake Sullivan there. That's Victoria Nuland, who is one of the most famous, architects of pretty much every pro-Ukrainian or anti-Russian policy. Certainly she gets credit for the Maidan coup, but Tony Blinken, of course, is involved in this. But let's focus on this person, because Jake Sullivan is front and center. And this is one of the most, you have to remember, the people like this, these career operatives, they're not elected. They come along for the ride, and they're given some incredible power. Nobody voted for this guy, but yet he's a Hillary Clinton operative. It's basically running Clinton and Obama policies through the Biden administration. If you believe that Joe Biden has no power at all, and he's just an octogenarian animatronic puppet, which there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that might be the case. But let's take a look at Ned Price, State Department spokesperson, best buddies with Jake Sullivan, was challenged by a journalist in the press briefing about this Seymour Hersh article. This is very revealing. Watch this exchange.
I'm sure you're aware of the new report from Seymour Hersh, how America took out the Nordstrom pipeline and the White House's denial of any involvement. Given the longstanding U.S. opposition to the pipeline, Secretary Blinken's calling its demise a tremendous opportunity, and Under Secretary of State Nuland's saying that the U.S. officials were pleased with the destruction of the pipeline, especially the Sweden's secretive investigation. Do you think the U.S. government's denial of involvement is credible?
I absolutely do, and I repeat it here. Anything else?
Let me follow up on that, if I might. Have you or anybody else at the State Department any communication with German, Norwegian ambassadors or other allies or officials on this matter?
On the matter of Nord Stream 2?
On the matter of the latest allegations, which give a fairly, I mean, it's an anonymous source, but it is a fairly detailed,
it would not be it would not be typical for us to engage allies and partners on something that is utter and complete nonsense and that should be rejected out of hand by anyone who is looking at it through through an objective lens. Yes, go ahead.
One more aspect on this. One of the allegations that Hersh makes is that it was taken off the CIA in order to prevent involvement, oversight as a covert operation. Did you read the piece?
I'm familiar with it.
One of his allegations is that it was taken off the
Look, rather than let this propaganda be aired in the briefing room, but let me just say it is a fundamental misunderstanding of oversight in our U.S. Congress. Beyond getting his facts entirely wrong, as he has before in very high-profile ways, it is a fundamental misunderstanding to suggest that our intelligence community is not subject to oversight. Anyone who writes that, anything who writes anything like that, should not be believed on any fact that he or she puts forward.
That it was taken off of the CIA and put under military in order to prevent...
Our military is also subject to rigorous oversight.
That's my question. That's
yes.
my question.
The answer is yes.
Do you recognize and abide by the War Powers Clause in such a situation?
So what did you conclude from that exchange?
Well, he didn't read. He hasn't read the article.
He's
familiar with it, but he didn't read it.
So the State Department spokesman didn't even bother to read the article, and yet he launches a character assassination against Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh. There's plenty of detail in Hersh's article.
Yeah.
Plenty of things that you could pick off, and the whole point of it is that they didn't have to go through oversight because they pretty much did it through conventional teams and through a protocol that basically is routine, using regular Navy divers. Biden even said he was going to do it. Victoria Nuland warned she was going to do it. They said openly. So this is the whole point of this, Mike. So Russia's reacted here. And Russia's reaction has been basically they want sort of pay dirt on this. So here Dmitry Peskov has made a number of statements on this, very strong statements about this. So, from Russia's point of view, they already suspected this was the case. This probably isn't a big surprise to them. But this changes the calculus, Mike, doesn't it, on diplomatic negotiations?
It does.
This gives a lot of leverage to Russia, and America loses a lot of leverage. Britain loses a lot of leverage. NATO, all they can stand around do is make denials at this point. Not a very strong position to be in.
Indeed. Indeed. Okay, well, of course, one of the other areas where there has been apparently Western interference in the Ukrainian affairs, SpaceX and Starlink in particular. Now, if we go back to July 2022 here, Euromaidan Press tweeting out 15,000 Starlink user kits have been delivered to Ukraine. Ukrainian troops cut off at Azovstal used Starlink to send and publish online photos and videos chronicling their plight, along with public and private messages to the outside world. So that was what was being tweeted out at the time. Around the same time, we have this Politico report, UkraineX, how Elon Musk's space satellites changed the war on the ground. And if we get a quote from this, they're talking about Elon Musk being the man to thank, embedded in frontline hot zone just south of strategic town of Izium. In Ukraine's war-ravaged east, Alexei, who declined to give his last name for security reasons, is now a power user of Starlink, a satellite communication system owned by Musk SpaceX. But the important thing here is, Patrick, as much as many people at the time were saying this was a bad idea and it shouldn't be happening, it was being used for, well, at worst, propaganda, to send out photographs from Azovstal or whatever for communication. It wasn't being used for specifically military purposes, but that situation then changed. And so Starlink, SpaceX rather, has now made a statement on this. So here is Gwynne Shotwell, who's the SpaceX president, saying that Ukrainians have leveraged Starlink in ways that were unintentional and not part of any agreement. There are things that we can do to limit their ability to do that. There are things that we can do and we have done. And so they were particularly objecting about the fact that Starlink was no longer being used just for communications and personal communications. It was being used to actually task certain weapon systems.
Like drones.
Drones, for example.
Drones, for instance.
That was the one thing that they mentioned in particular. So they seem to have decided against any future use of Starlink for this kind of purpose.
And you have to remember, this comes on the heels of just a couple of months ago when Starlink announced that they're cutting off internet access from the Starlink array of satellites to Ukraine because they weren't paying the bill. I think it was something like, it wasn't a lot of money, it would be $21 million for the whole country per month or something like that. Chump change compared to what they've been forking out for Zelensky into that sort of money pit that's called Kiev.
Right.
So what's 21 million a month? That's like nothing. Even Britain could afford to pick up that bill, right? So this is interesting. So it seems like they've been gradually backing away from this, which is a very interesting position from Elon Musk and from Starlink, considering all of the revelations, especially with the Twitter files
Right.
of recent.